Now, investment banking fees in Sub-Saharan Africa reached an estimated $556 million, with advisory fees from mergers and acquisitions increasing by 55%. JP Morgan earned the most investment banking fees for Sub-Saharan Africa, with Standard Bank following closely. This is according to the Refinitiv Investment Banking report for 2019 in Sub-Saharan Africa. Joining me to unpack more on this is Franita Neuville, who is an Investment and Advisory Performance Director for Middle East and Africa at Refinitiv. Thanks so much for your time, Franita. What is interesting about this report is the increase. So it was a 3% increase in the previous year, but I do understand that this is only the second increase that, or the second time investment banking fees have increased since the report was compiled in 2000. Is that correct?
No. So actually, what it's saying is that this has been the third time now that the number of the number has actually exceeded a specific time.
Right.
So it's actually that it's basically the third highest number that we've seen in the last 19 or so years since 2000. Yes.
So it's looking pretty good to be in the investment banking space then, according to these numbers.
It does. We were actually a little bit surprised by the numbers. So the 3% that was recorded year-on-year growth is a little bit contradictory to what we saw up until the end of the third quarter. Mm-hmm. So in the first, second and third quarter numbers that we looked at, those numbers actually decreased year-on-year. So we were expecting numbers to decrease for the full year as well. And in the fourth quarter, there were enough deals actually to push that back to positive.
And what was the major surprise here? I do see the report makes or does highlight the unbundling and the listing of Naspers' process in Europe. Was that mainly the reason behind the surprise and this push in the fourth quarter?
It actually wasn't, because that was done a little bit earlier in the year, as well as the Anadarko deal, which was also a big deal that pushed the numbers a little bit higher. So it was accumulation of a couple of smaller deals in the fourth quarter that came through, but nothing really significant that we can point out. So there were just more deals done in the fourth quarter at a little bit larger numbers.
All right. I mean, in terms of the breakdown of the numbers, so it's M&A that is mainly driving investment banking fees higher, equity and bond raisings not so much. But in that M&A space, just give us a breakdown of the inbound and the outbound mergers that we did see.
So the biggest ones, as you alluded to, was the Naspers unbundling and the raising of the capital in the Netherlands with Myriad International. The second biggest deal was actually inflows from a foreign entity into South Africa into an M&A deal, which is the Anadarko deal, where Total picked up Anadarko's African assets, which was listed in Algeria, or not listed, but which can be found in Algeria, in Ghana, Mozambique, and South Africa. So that was accounted for the biggest inbound deal that we saw.
And what is interesting also about this report is that South Africa was actually the top target for M&A activity in 2019. And this despite the fact that, economically and politically things haven't been in best form.
Yes, it is interesting. I do think that Naspers obviously, again, accounted for most of that, as well as the Anadarko deal, which added to that. What was interesting to see, though, is that syndicated loans increased so much over the last year, and it actually surpassed equity capital raising.
So syndicated loans, what are we talking here? A group of banks providing money for a big project?
100%. So instead of companies actually going to exchanges and raising money on an equity capital market and doing an IPO, for instance, these companies actually preferred this year to go to the banks and do syndicated loans and get funding for projects, etc., that they want to through that level and a way of getting funding.
Why? We do know that equity raising can be quite a costly exercise, but was it all down to price that companies are choosing this form of financing rather than coming to the market?
That's one of the reasons. The other one is that these last couple of years, there's been some undersubscriptions in the market, not necessarily in South Africa, but outside of South African borders and some of the other exchanges across the continent. So I think companies are a little bit skeptical about whether they're going to be able to raise the needed capital through equity capital markets specifically. And then also, I think equity capital markets is a little bit of a longer term commitment to actually raising capital. So with your syndicated loans, you've got a set term and you've got a certain amount of stakeholders that you need to report to during that time. However, when it comes to the equity capital markets, you've got a much wider range of capital holders that you need to report to, essentially.
And then talk to me about the sectors that are garnering the most or the biggest interest here, and whether we're likely to see a continuation into 2020.
So the biggest sector was media and entertainment, and then also petrochemicals and oil, which was, again, those two deals that we've alluded to already. So they were the two major ones. I think definitely on the oil side and the petrochem side, that could continue because of more assets being discovered on the east of the continent specifically, and interests from some of the European and US players in that space that need to find new ways or new areas where they can actually mine for oil and gas and drill for it. So we can expect that to continue, I think.
And the current pipeline, are you privy to any of the numbers for this year by way of, where most of the action will take place, whether it will be in the M&A space once again, or we might see a return in equity raisings that were down significantly last year, as well as bond raisings and the outlook for syndicated loans?
I think syndicated loans and M&A will continue. It's difficult to say exactly when and where these deals are going to happen.
Sure.
But syndicated loans definitely, as companies still need access to capital. Equity capital markets will remain subdued, I think, for the rest of for the foreseeing future. Debt capital markets, maybe not so much. We do have the African Development Bank that always partakes and ensures that the numbers are sufficiently high there in the debt capital markets. And then also we saw South Africa coming to market with their Eurobond in September, which added a good number to the debt capital markets. But there's always also countries looking for funding would usually get it through the debt capital markets, and that's going to continue as well into the year.
Well, we will track those numbers as they come out. Franita, thanks so much for your time. Let's leave it there. That, of course, was Franita Neuville, who is an Investment and Advisory Performance Director for the Middle East and Africa at Refinitiv.